I'm Rebecca, 32, and never thought I'd see my mother's face crumble like that across the dinner table. The restaurant fell silent as my words hung in the air. Then who's been paying your bills for the last 5 years? Mom's champagne glass froze midway to her lips. Dad stared at his plate, and my brother Jason looked like he might be sick. Just moments before, she'd called me a failure for wasting my degree at my modest-paying nonprofit job. Little did she know, I'd been anonymously covering their mortgage since Dad's business collapsed. Some truths change everything. Before I dive into how I ended up secretly supporting my parents while they criticized my life choices, I'm curious where you're watching this from. If my family drama is already hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the people who judge us the most are the ones who don't see everything we do behind the scenes. Let's get into how this all started. Growing up in Wellesley, a prestigious Boston suburb, meant appearances were everything. Our Tudor-style home with its manicured lawn was the perfect backdrop for my parents, Margaret and Thomas Wilson, to host cocktail parties where conversations revolved around vacation homes, private schools, and who had recently been promoted. My mother, with her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and tennis club membership, orchestrated our family image with military precision. My brother Jason was everything my parents wanted in a child. Athletic, charismatic, and handsome with our father's strong jaw and confident smile. He was the golden child who could do no wrong. 3 years older than me, he was captain of the lacrosse team, president of the student council, and pursued business just like our father. Every dinner conversation centered around Jason's achievements, his latest game, or how the coach said he had real potential. I was the academic achiever, straight A's, debate team champion, editor of the school newspaper. But somehow, these accomplishments always felt secondary in our household. "That's nice, Rebecca," my mother would say dismissively when I showed her an award, before quickly pivoting to ask Jason about his day. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't neglected. My parents paid for piano lessons, sent me to the same private school as Jason, and bought me nice clothes. But there was always this unspoken hierarchy. The Wilsons, people would say. Thomas, the successful developer, Margaret, the perfect hostess, Jason, the star athlete, and Rebecca. I was the afterthought, the footnote to our family story. My parents had very specific ideas about success. It meant a high-paying career, marrying someone from a good family, and maintaining a certain lifestyle. So when I started talking about wanting to help people, about making a difference rather than making money, the tension began. "You can volunteer on weekends," my mother said when I mentioned wanting to work with disadvantaged communities. "But you need a real career, Rebecca. Law or medicine would suit you. What about social work?" I suggested at dinner one night during my junior year of high school. My father lowered his Wall Street Journal. "Social work?" he repeated as if I'd suggested becoming a street performer. "That's not a career, it's a hobby. And not a particularly well-compensated one." "People need more than money to be happy, Dad," I said. "Easy for someone to say when they've never had to worry about money," he replied, effectively ending the conversation. College applications became a battleground. I wanted Bryn Mawr with its excellent social sciences programs. My parents pushed for Harvard or Yale, preferably with a pre-law or business focus. We compromised on Boston University, close enough for them to keep tabs on me, prestigious enough for their friends to nod approvingly. During those college years, our communication became increasingly strained. Weekend visits home felt like interrogations. "Are you still wasting time with that community outreach program? Have you considered switching to economics? The Morgan's daughter is pre-med and already has internship offers." I graduated with honors, a dual degree in social work and nonprofit management, and a job offer from a community outreach program that worked with low-income families. My starting salary was $38,000, a number that made my mother physically wince when I told her. The graduation party my parents threw was really a networking event disguised as a celebration. I overheard my mother telling her friends I was taking a year to find myself before law school, completely erasing my actual career choice from the narrative. "When are you going to stop this charitable phase?" my mother asked later that night, after the guests had left and I was helping clean up. You have so much potential, Rebecca. Don't throw it away helping people who made bad choices. The people I work with didn't all make bad choices, Mom. Many of them never had the choices we take for granted. This bleeding heart nonsense, she sighed. You sound like a campaign speech. That night marked the first major confrontation. I told my parents I wasn't going to law school, that I was committed to my chosen path, and that their disapproval wouldn't change my mind. My father stormed out of the room. My mother cried about how I was throwing away my future. Jason, home from his first year at business school, tried to mediate but ultimately sided with our parents. I moved into a small apartment with 2 roommates in a part of Boston. My mother deemed unsafe, it wasn't, and began building my life separate from my family's expectations. I learned to budget carefully, to thrift shop for work clothes, to meal prep on Sundays. My coworkers became my friends, people who valued me for my contributions rather than my pedigree. I saw my family on holidays and occasional Sunday dinners, events that became increasingly tense as the years passed. My mother's criticism never eased, it just evolved. First, it was about my career choice, then about my apartment, then about my lack of a suitable boyfriend. Jason followed our father into real estate development, joining the family business straight out of his MBA program. Their conversations excluded me, filled with industry jargon and mutual understanding I couldn't access. As challenging as those early career years were, they taught me financial discipline. I learned to live within my means, to save methodically, to distinguish between wants and needs, skills that, ironically, my wealthy parents never mastered themselves. The recession hit the luxury real estate market like a wrecking ball. At first, my father dismissed it as a temporary correction. The high-end market always bounces back first, he assured us at a family dinner in 2008. People with money still have money. But as months passed, the strain began to show. My father looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. My mother continued hosting dinner parties, but the wine got cheaper and the guest list smaller. They canceled their annual trip to Europe that summer, citing scheduling conflicts rather than financial concerns. I might never have known the truth if not for a chance encounter. I was presenting a grant proposal to a local foundation when I recognized one of the board members as my father's former business partner, Leonard Crawford. "Rebecca Wilson," he said, shaking my hand a bit too firmly after the meeting. I didn't realize Thomas's daughter worked in nonprofit. "For about 5 years now," I said, used to the surprise. "How is your father holding up?" he asked, his voice dropping. "Nasty business with Lakeside Heights." I maintained my composure, though I had no idea what he was talking about. "Dad doesn't share much business talk with me." Leonard looked uncomfortable. "Of course. Well, please give him my regards." That night, I researched Lakeside Heights, my father's most ambitious development project. The luxury condominiums were supposed to be his legacy, but construction had halted. The development company had filed for bankruptcy protection. My father's name was mentioned in several articles, none flattering. I called Jason, who deflected my questions. "Dad's handling it. Nothing for you to worry about." But I did worry, especially when I drove by my parents' house and noticed the gardener was gone, the immaculate lawn now showing signs of neglect. My mother had canceled our last 2 lunch dates, something she'd never done before. Finally, I confronted my father. I waited outside his office building one evening, knowing he was still working late despite the company's troubles. He looked shocked to see me, then resigned. "Let me buy you a drink," he said, leading me to a dark bar around the corner. There, over scotch he couldn't really afford, he broke down. The company was essentially insolvent. The bank was threatening to foreclose on their house. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage. "Does Mom know?" I asked. "She knows things are tight," he said, looking ashamed. "But not how tight. She refuses to cut back on anything significant. Says appearances matter now more than ever." "Jason? He's trying to help, but he's overextended himself trying to salvage some of the projects. Rebecca, I need you to keep this between us. Your mother, it would destroy her to lose the house." I sat there, stunned. My financially savvy father, the man who lectured me about the impracticality of my career choice, had leveraged everything on luxury properties right before the market crashed. Meanwhile, my mother was still buying designer clothes they couldn't afford, criticizing my sensible life choices, and pretending everything was fine. The next day, I visited their house when I knew both parents would be out. Using the spare key they didn't know I still had, I searched my father's home office. What I found confirmed everything: foreclosure notices, credit card statements with massive balances, investment accounts depleted to almost nothing. My parents were weeks away from losing their home, the centerpiece of their carefully constructed image. I spent the weekend running numbers. With my savings and careful budgeting, I could cover their mortgage. It would mean no vacations, no new car when my old Honda finally died, no moving to a better apartment. But I could do it, at least until the market recovered and my father could rebuild. Working with a lawyer friend who owed me a favor, I set up an anonymous payment arrangement. The bank would receive monthly payments from an LLC I created, with no way to trace it back to me. I told myself it was temporary, just until my father got back on his feet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every Sunday dinner, my mother would make some cutting remark about my little job or how I should find a husband who can provide properly, not knowing that her mortgage payment had cleared that week because of my little job. My father suspected, I think, but never asked directly, his pride too wounded to acknowledge the truth. As 1 year turned into 2, then 3, I adjusted to my new normal. I took on consulting work in addition to my full-time job, specializing in grant writing for smaller nonprofits. I became an expert at stretching dollars, at finding creative solutions to financial shortfalls. My parents' lifestyle downgraded slightly, from extravagant to merely very comfortable, but the house remained, the appearances maintained. What I hadn't calculated was the emotional cost. The resentment that built each time my mother criticized my choices while unknowingly benefiting from them. The strain of working 60-hour weeks to support 2 households. The loneliness of carrying a secret that separated me from potential partners. "Why do you always have to rush off to your second job?" asked Michael, a kind, interesting man I'd been dating for 3 months. "We never have a full weekend together." "I need the money," I said, the same half-truth I always offered. "For what? You live so frugally. What are you saving for that's worth all this stress?" I couldn't tell him that a significant portion of my income was secretly paying for my parents' 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, while they continued to think of me as the family disappointment. So the relationship ended, like the others before it. Meanwhile, Jason floundered in the wake of our father's business troubles. Always meant to inherit the company, he now faced the prospect of rebuilding from scratch. The pressure led to drinking, first socially, then alone. I found him one night in his car outside my apartment, too intoxicated to drive home. "I was supposed to be the successful one," he slurred as I helped him inside. "The son who made Dad proud. Now look at me." I let him sleep on my couch, called in sick for him the next morning, and took him to breakfast when he finally woke up. "How are you so together?" he asked, squinting against his hangover in the morning light. "You were always the dreamer, the one with impractical ideas. Now you're the stable one." "Life's funny that way," was all I said. I didn't mention the mortgage payments. I didn't mention the second job. Some pride is hard to surrender, even between siblings. Despite the financial strain of supporting 2 households, my career flourished. There's nothing like necessity to sharpen your professional edge. I became known as the grant writer who could secure funding when others failed. My proposals were meticulously researched, my budgets impeccable, my impact metrics compelling. Executive directors from other nonprofits began asking for my help, first informally, then as paid consultation. "You have a gift for translating passion into persuasion," my boss said during my performance review. "You make donors believe in our work because you genuinely believe in it yourself." By my 5th year at the organization, I'd been promoted twice. My official title was Development Director, but I functioned as the executive director's right hand, involved in strategic planning and program development as well as fundraising. My salary had increased to $58,000, still modest by Boston standards, but a significant improvement. With my consulting income, I was technically earning more than many of my peers with corporate jobs, though no one would guess it from my lifestyle. The toll came in other ways. I lived in the same cramped apartment with rotating roommates, all in their early 20s, while I approached my 30s. I drove the same Honda with 150,000 miles and growing. I never took vacations that involved flights or hotels. My wardrobe consisted of carefully curated thrift store finds and sale rack basics that I mixed and matched to appear more extensive than it was. Social invitations dwindled as I constantly declined due to work commitments. Friends stopped calling after too many rain checks. Dating became a series of first and second meetings that rarely progressed further, as I couldn't explain why I had so little free time or disposable income despite my professional success. There was David, the environmental lawyer who wanted to plan a hiking trip in Colorado. There was James, the high school teacher who couldn't understand why I was always working weekends. There was Sophia, the graphic designer who directly asked if I had a spending problem when she noticed how carefully I monitored every dollar, despite my salary. The most promising relationship was with Eric, a kind and patient man who worked in city government. For 8 months, we navigated my complicated schedule. He never pressured me about money, happy with home-cooked meals and free community events. But eventually, the questions came. "I think you're hiding something," he said one night as we washed dishes together in my small kitchen. "You work constantly, live like you're still making entry-level wages, and get tense whenever I bring up the future. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "It's complicated," I said. "I can handle complicated, Rebecca. What I can't handle is feeling shut out of your life." I wanted to tell him. The words formed in my mind. My parents are financial disasters masquerading as success stories, and I've been secretly paying their mortgage for years while they continue to criticize my life choices. But pride, loyalty, and habit kept me silent. Eric left that night and didn't come back. I told myself it was for the best. How could I build a future with someone while carrying this secret? How could I explain that a significant portion of my income was dedicated to maintaining my parents' illusions? The irony was that I became exceptionally good with money. I could stretch a dollar further than anyone I knew. I could spot a hidden fee or a bad financial decision from a mile away. I built an emergency fund despite my circumstances. I understood compound interest, investment basics, and the true cost of debt better than most financial advisors. Meanwhile, my brother Jason continued struggling. After failing to revive several of our father's stalled projects, he attempted to start his own smaller development company. The first project went over budget and barely broke even. The second attracted an investor who pulled out midway, leaving Jason with debts he couldn't cover. He called me in a panic late one night. "The bank is going to come after my condo," he said, his voice tight with fear. "I need $15,000 by Friday or everything collapses." I didn't ask questions. I transferred the money from my emergency fund, money I'd been saving for years in case my car finally died or my rent increased beyond my budget. Jason promised to pay me back, but we both knew it would be years before he could. "How are you doing this?" he asked after profusely thanking me. "Where is this money coming from?" "I'm good with money," I said simply. "Always have been." What I didn't say, I learned to be good with money because no one else in this family is. I learned because I had to. The emotional weight grew heavier. I began seeing a therapist, finding room in my budget by cutting back even further on essentials. Dr. Levine helped me process my complicated feelings toward my family, the mix of resentment and love, obligation and anger. "You've created a situation where you're simultaneously the family hero and the family scapegoat," she observed. "You're rescuing them financially while allowing them to believe you're the least successful member of the family." "What's the alternative?" I asked. "Let them lose their house? Let my mother face the social humiliation she fears more than anything? Let my father's shame consume him completely?" "Those might be natural consequences of their choices," Dr. Levine suggested gently. "Just as your limited social life and financial strain are the consequences of yours." I knew she was right, but I couldn't see a way out that didn't involve destroying my family as I knew it. So I continued my double life. Respected nonprofit leader by day, family financial savior by night, perceived failure in my parents' eyes throughout. The annual Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter gatherings became increasingly difficult. I'd sit at my parents' dining table, using the silver they still polished to perfection, listening to my mother lament how I was wasting my potential while eating food I had essentially paid for. Rebecca still insists on taking the bus, my mother told our family friends one Easter, as if a 30-year-old professional woman shouldn't have proper transportation. I didn't mention that the money that could have gone toward a car payment was instead ensuring she could continue hosting these elegant dinners. I simply smiled and changed the subject, a skill I'd perfected over the years. Everything changed last spring. After 7 years of dedicated work, I was promoted to executive director when my mentor retired. The board's vote was unanimous. The local business journal ran a profile on me as one of the youngest EDs in the Boston nonprofit sector. Under my leadership, we secured a major multi-year grant from a national foundation, bringing financial stability to our organization for the first time in its history. The irony didn't escape me that I had finally achieved financial security for my nonprofit while still secretly supporting my parents. The grant's success was followed by a prestigious sector award recognizing my innovative approach to community development. Colleagues congratulated me. My staff organized a surprise celebration. Friends I'd neglected for too long sent flowers and warm messages. My mother's response to the news: "That's nice, dear. Though I always hoped you'd use your talents for something more substantial than playing charity." That comment, delivered during our monthly phone call, hit differently than her usual criticisms. Here I was, finally achieving significant professional success on my own terms, and she couldn't acknowledge it, not even slightly. The next week brought another pivotal moment. During my annual physical, Dr. Chen looked concerned reviewing my blood work. "Your cortisol levels are extremely elevated," she said. "Blood pressure too. Rebecca, are you under unusual stress?" I laughed until I realized she was serious. "No more than usual." "Then usual is too much. These numbers indicate chronic stress that's affecting your physical health. You're 32, Rebecca. You shouldn't have the stress markers of someone 20 years older." She recommended meditation, regular exercise, and most importantly, identifying and addressing the sources of stress in my life. I nodded, promised to take her advice seriously, and left with a prescription for blood pressure medication I never thought I'd need before middle age. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, thinking about the 5 years I'd spent supporting my parents while enduring their criticism, about the relationships I'd sacrificed, the experiences I'd forgone, about my brother's growing dependency, about my health, now showing concrete signs of damage from the strain. Something had to change. The next morning, I called a financial advisor and laid out the entire situation. She was professional enough not to judge, though her eyes widened slightly when I explained the arrangement. "You need an exit strategy," she said after reviewing the numbers. "This isn't sustainable, especially if you ever want to build your own financial security or family." Together, we created a plan to gradually reduce my support over 12 months, giving my parents time to adjust their expenses or find alternative solutions. I would need to have difficult conversations, set clear boundaries, and accept that the aftermath might permanently change my family dynamics. Preparing for this conversation felt like planning a military campaign. I rehearsed what I would say. I gathered documentation of my contributions over the years, not to throw in their faces, but to ensure there could be no denial of facts. I scheduled sessions with Dr. Levine to strengthen my resolve and prepare for the emotional fallout. What I didn't anticipate was Jason's involvement. He called me, sounding unusually sober and serious. "We need to talk, in person." We met at a quiet cafe near my office. He looked better than he had in years, the bloated puffiness of his drinking days replaced by the sharper features we shared. "I know what you've been doing," he said without preamble. "About Mom and Dad's mortgage. About the money you've been sending them monthly." I felt lightheaded suddenly. "How?" "Dad asked me to look at their finances, see if I could help them restructure some debt. I found the payment trail. It wasn't that hard once I knew what to look for. I waited, expecting judgment or anger. Instead, my brother reached across the table and took my hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. "I would have helped. You've been carrying this alone for years." "You had your own struggles," I said. "And honestly, I didn't think you'd believe me at first. You and I were never exactly close." "That's on me," he admitted. "I was Dad's golden boy, and I let it go to my head. I looked down on your career choice, your lifestyle. Then I failed at the only thing I was supposed to be good at, while you quietly succeeded at everything you touched." We talked for hours. Really talked, perhaps for the first time as adults. About our parents' dysfunctional relationship with money and status. About the ways we'd both been shaped by their expectations. About his drinking and recovery. About my resentment and sacrifice. "You need to tell them," he said finally. "This has to stop, not just for your sake, but for theirs too. They're living in a fantasy that can't continue. They'll be humiliated. Mom will never forgive me." "Maybe," he conceded. "Or maybe this will finally force them to face reality. Either way, Rebecca, you've done enough. More than enough." He promised to support me through the conversation, to back me up when the time came. We agreed that a neutral setting might be best. Somewhere public enough to prevent a complete meltdown, but private enough for a real discussion. That's how we ended up planning a dinner at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant my mother loved. The pretext was celebrating my promotion and award, though I had little hope they would actually focus on my achievements. Jason would join us, ostensibly to make it a full family celebration. The morning of the dinner, I felt physically ill with anxiety. I canceled my meetings, something I rarely did, and spent hours preparing mentally for what was to come. I chose my outfit carefully, a professional dress that projected confidence rather than my usual, more casual style. I arranged for a car service rather than taking the bus, removing at least one potential criticism from my mother's arsenal. As I watched the driver navigate toward the restaurant, I tried to quiet my racing thoughts. 5 years of secret support were about to end. 5 years of criticism endured while providing financial rescue. Whatever happened tonight, my relationship with my parents would never be the same. I promise it almost doesn't matter what shoes you wear when you're finally about to tell your judgmental parents you've been paying their mortgage for 5 years. Almost. If you've ever had to face a difficult family conversation, let me know where you would have chosen to have this confrontation. The restaurant I picked was about to become the stage for the most dramatic dinner of my life. La Maison was exactly the kind of restaurant my mother loved. White tablecloths, crystal glasses that caught the light from tasteful chandeliers, servers who appeared and disappeared with practiced invisibility. The maître d' led me to our reserved table, a corner spot that offered some privacy without being completely secluded. My parents arrived 10 minutes late. My mother in a navy dress I recognized from Nordstrom's latest collection. My father wearing the Brooks Brothers suit that had been his uniform for decades. They didn't arrive in the Lexus they'd owned for years, I noticed, but in a brand new Mercedes. "Rebecca, darling," my mother air-kissed both my cheeks, her perfume expensive and familiar. "You look professional." From my mother, this was neither a compliment nor an insult, simply an observation that I had made an effort beyond my usual standards. "The traffic was dreadful," my father said by way of greeting, signaling to the waiter. "I need a scotch. Macallan 18, neat." I'd been sober and anxious at the table for 20 minutes, watching the door, my rehearsed speech playing on repeat in my mind. Already, I could feel the familiar pattern asserting itself, my parents taking control of the interaction, setting the tone. "Jason's running late," I said, checking my phone for the third time. My brother had texted that he was stuck in a client meeting, but would be there as soon as possible. The ally I was counting on was absent for the opening act. "Probably busy with his new project," my father said proudly. "He's finally found his niche with those smaller residential developments. Much more sustainable in this market." The waiter returned with my father's scotch and took our drink orders. My mother selected the most expensive champagne on the menu. "We're celebrating," she announced. "Our daughter's little promotion." I bit my tongue. My little promotion had been covered in the Boston Business Journal. I was now managing a team of 20 and a budget of over $2 million. Speaking of celebrations, my mother continued after ordering. We ran into the Prestons last weekend. Their daughter Charlotte just made partner at her law firm, 34, and already making mid-six figures. She always was such a sensible girl. And so it began, the familiar litany of other people's children and their superior life choices. I nodded and smiled, letting the words wash over me as I always had. My father ordered another scotch. My mother transitioned seamlessly from Charlotte Preston to Elizabeth Morgan's engagement to a surgeon to Bradley Thompson's new position at a hedge fund. Jason arrived as the appetizers were being served, looking harried but determined. He gave me a subtle nod of support as he kissed our mother's cheek. Sorry I'm late. The Carson project has some zoning complications. That's my boy, always working, our father said, clapping him on the shoulder. You'll make up the losses from last year in no time. The conversation shifted to Jason's latest venture, a small apartment building conversion in an up-and-coming neighborhood. My parents listened with rapt attention as he detailed the investment structure, the projected returns, the timeline for completion. And Rebecca, my mother finally said, turning to me as our entrees arrived, tell us about this award Jason mentioned. Something about community service? This was my opening. It's the Harriet Tubman Award for Innovation in Community Development, I explained. It recognizes our organization's work, creating pathways out of poverty for families in East Boston. East Boston, my mother repeated, as if I'd said Mars. Isn't that where all those immigrant families live? Yes, among others. We've developed a model that combines affordable housing, job training, childcare, and financial education. It's being looked at as a potential template for other cities. How nice, my mother said vaguely, clearly losing interest. Though I've always thought these programs create dependency rather than self-sufficiency. I took a deep breath. Actually, our data shows the opposite. With the right support, families can become completely self-sufficient within 2 to 3 years. It's about removing barriers, not creating handouts. Data can be manipulated to show anything, my father interjected. The real question is whether these people are paying taxes or taking them. Before I could respond, my mother changed the subject entirely. Did I mention the Whitakers are selling their vacation home in Nantucket? They're asking $2 million, which seems reasonable given the location. The familiar dismissal stung, but I was used to it. The conversation drifted to summer homes, to people in their social circle, to Jason's upcoming golf tournament. I ate my perfectly cooked salmon and waited for the right moment. It came when I mentioned considering buying a condo. A condo? My mother looked genuinely shocked. In what neighborhood? South End. There's a nice building near the community center where I volunteer. The South End? But that's still so urban. She made the word sound like a disease. Surely you could find something in a better area. Not that you'd want to overextend yourself on your salary. My salary is quite adequate for my needs, I said carefully. But so limited in terms of future growth, she sighed. I've never understood why you insist on this nonprofit path when you could be doing so much better. Define better, I said, feeling a strange calm descend. This was it. The moment. Better paid, better respected, better positioned for advancement, my mother listed, ticking points off on her manicured fingers. Look at your brother. Look at the Preston's daughter. Even with your recent promotion, you're barely making what they started with out of college. And yet, I'm happy with my choices, I said. Happiness doesn't pay the bills, Rebecca. She took a sip of champagne. Your father and I worry about your future security. What happens when you want children? When you need to plan for retirement? This job is fine for your 20s. But at 32, you're approaching a time when these choices have real consequences. Mom, Jason warned, seeing my expression change. No, Jason. Someone needs to say it. Your sister has been a disappointment professionally. She had every advantage, every opportunity, and she chose this charitable existence. I'm being kind saying this to her face rather than just worrying behind her back. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter, though whether the other diners actually fell silent or my focus narrowed so completely on my mother, I couldn't tell. A disappointment, I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. That's how you see me? Not as a person, darling, just your professional choices. You've really been a disappointment in that regard, Rebecca. You could have been so much more. I looked at my father, who studied his plate intently. No defense offered, not even a glance of support. Jason started to speak, but I held up my hand. The moment had arrived. Then who's been paying your bills for the last 5 years? My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. What? Your mortgage? Your property taxes? The supplemental checks that keep your bank account from overdrafting every month. Who do you think has been covering those expenses since Dad's business collapsed? The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. That's ridiculous, she finally managed. Your father restructured some investments. We've had some belt-tightening, but nothing that dramatic. The house was 3 months from foreclosure in 2008, I said calmly. Dad's company was insolvent. The investments were gone. There was no restructuring, just my monthly transfers disguised as a management company. My father still wouldn't meet my eyes. Confirmation enough. Thomas? My mother turned to him, her voice rising slightly. Tell her she's confused. Margaret, he began, then stopped. His shoulders slumped. Rebecca is not confused. 5 years, I continued, feeling a strange mixture of terror and liberation. I've worked a full-time job and consulting gigs on nights and weekends. I've lived with roommates, driven the same car since college, and canceled vacations, all so you could keep the house, maintain your club memberships, and continue hosting dinner parties where you tell your friends what a disappointment I am. That's not. We never asked you to, my mother stammered. No, you didn't ask. Dad was too proud to ask, and you were too oblivious to know you needed help. But I knew. I found the foreclosure notices. I saw the credit card statements. I made the choice to help anonymously because I loved you and couldn't bear to see you lose everything. Jason reached over and squeezed my hand. My mother turned to him, seeking an ally. You knew about this? Not until recently, he admitted. But I've confirmed it. Rebecca's been the family safety net, while we've all been treating her like she's barely staying afloat. This is absurd, my mother said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Thomas, explain to the children what really happened. My father finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression defeated. It's true, Margaret. After Lakeside collapsed, we were finished. The banks were calling in loans. Our credit was maxed out. I was weeks away from having to tell you we needed to sell the house, liquidate everything. Then the management company started making our mortgage payments, he continued. I suspected it might be Rebecca, but I couldn't. I didn't want to know for certain. It was easier to believe it was some administrative error in our favor. Which explains the new Mercedes, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. An administrative error. A woman at a nearby table was openly staring now, her dinner companion whispering urgently for her to mind her own business. The waiter approached, sensed the tension, and retreated without taking our dessert orders. I never meant for you to find out, my father said quietly. I was trying to rebuild, to fix things before you ever needed to know how bad it got. 5 years, Dad. 5 years of working myself to exhaustion, while Mom criticized my career, my apartment, my clothes, my life choices. 5 years of hearing how disappointed you both were in me, while I was the only thing keeping you in that house. My mother's face had lost all color. Her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. I don't understand, she said, her voice small. How could you afford this? Your job. My little job pays a reasonable salary. My consulting work pays even better. I'm good at what I do, Mom. Really good. The award you dismissed? It comes with a $50,000 grant for our organization. But you always seemed so frugal, she said, as if this were the most confusing part. Because I was supporting two households on one income, I explained, feeling suddenly exhausted. Because every extra dollar went to maintaining your lifestyle while you looked down on mine. Jason signaled for the check, his expression grim. Our father stared into his empty scotch glass, as if it held answers. Our mother sat perfectly still, her social mask cracked beyond repair. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, I said, softening my tone slightly. I'm telling you because it needs to stop. I've created a financial plan to phase out my support over the next year. You'll need to make significant changes. Sell the house, possibly. Definitely the new car. Cut back on non-essentials. This is humiliating, my mother whispered. Being lied to for years was pretty humiliating too, I countered. Being judged by the very people I was rescuing wasn't exactly a dignity-preserving experience. The check arrived. Jason took it before our father could reach for it. I think we all need some time to process this, he said, ever the mediator. Let's reconvene when everyone's had a chance to cool down. My father nodded mutely. My mother gathered her purse with trembling hands, her perfect composure shattered. I need some air, she said, rising unsteadily. As she walked toward the exit, my father finally looked directly at me. I'm sorry, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. I should have been honest. With you, with your mother, with myself. Yes, I agreed. You should have. He followed my mother outside, leaving Jason and me at the table, surrounded by half-eaten meals and wholly upended family dynamics. That went about as well as a root canal, Jason said, attempting to lighten the moment. Better, actually, I replied. At least with this, the pain might eventually lead to healing. I barely remember the drive home from the restaurant. My hands shook on the steering wheel as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. I'd done it. After 5 years of secret keeping, of swallowing resentment with every criticism, I'd finally spoken my truth. The relief was immediate, but tempered by uncertainty about what would follow. I just parked outside my apartment when my phone rang. It was my father. Can we talk? I'm in my car down the block. I found him sitting in his Mercedes, engine off, staring straight ahead. When I knocked on the window, he startled as if waking from a dream. He got out slowly, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I thought you'd be with Mom, I said. Jason took her home. She's not in a state for conversation right now. We walked silently to a nearby park, taking a bench overlooking a small pond. The spring evening was cool but not uncomfortable, the park nearly empty as darkness fell. I never meant for you to carry this burden, he finally said. When the payments started, I told myself it was a banking error. Then when I suspected it might be you, I convinced myself it was temporary, that I'd fix things, pay you back before you ever needed to say anything. 5 years isn't temporary, Dad. No, he passed a hand over his face. No, it's not. The truth is, I was ashamed. The great Thomas Wilson, brought down by his own hubris. I leveraged everything on luxury developments right before the market crashed. Classic cautionary tale. We all make mistakes, I said, surprised by the lack of anger in my voice. Not like this. I gambled with my family's security. Then I was too proud to admit it, to scale back, to start over smaller. Your mother, he trailed off, looking at the darkening water. Mom wouldn't accept a lifestyle change. I finished for him. It's not entirely her fault, he said, which surprised me. I created this fiction of endless prosperity. I encouraged her expensive tastes, her social ambitions. We built a life on appearances, and when the foundation crumbled, neither of us knew how to live differently. But you let her criticize me, belittle my choices, while I was saving you. His shoulders slumped further. I was a coward, Rebecca. Every time she made those comments, I should have stopped her. Should have told her the truth. Should have acknowledged that your sensible approach to life and money was exactly what we should have been emulating, not mocking. We sat in silence for several minutes. A jogger passed, breath visible in the cooling air. Lights came on in apartments across the pond. I don't know how to fix this, my father finally said, his voice breaking. I don't know if it can be fixed. It starts with honesty, I said. Complete financial transparency. No more pretending, no more appearances over reality. Your mother may not be capable of that. Then that's her choice to make, but I won't enable the fantasy anymore. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I am proud of you. Not just for helping us, though that was extraordinary, but for building a life of meaning, for having the courage to follow your convictions despite our disapproval. The words I'd waited decades to hear, finally spoken in a darkened park after the most painful dinner of my life. They meant something, but not as much as they once would have. Thank you, I said simply. But I need actions now, not just words. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Mom locked herself in the bedroom, taking the guest room tonight. You okay? I should go, my father said, seeing the message. Try to talk to your mother. Good luck, I said, not envying him the conversation ahead. After he left, I sat alone in the park until the cold finally drove me home. I took the next day off work, something I rarely did, and retreated to my friend Mia's lake house about an hour outside the city. She was traveling for business and had offered me the keys months ago, an offer I'd been too busy to accept until now. The solitude was both welcome and overwhelming. For 5 years, I'd been so focused on working, on supporting 2 households, on maintaining the secret, that I'd never fully processed the emotions involved. Now, in the quiet of the lake house, it all came crashing down. I cried for hours, tears of anger, relief, grief, and something like freedom. Jason called daily with updates. Our mother had barely left her room for 3 days. Our father was sleeping in the guest bedroom. The atmosphere in the house was funereal. She's in shock, Jason explained. Her entire self-image was built around social status and financial security. Finding out it was all a fiction, and worse, that her supposedly unsuccessful daughter was keeping it afloat, it's broken something fundamental in her worldview. I never wanted to hurt her, I said, surprised to find it was true despite everything. I just couldn't keep living the lie. On the 4th day, my father arrived at the lake house unannounced. He looked haggard but determined. Your mother still won't talk about it, he said as I made us coffee. But I've been making calls, meeting with financial advisors. The house needs to go on the market. The car too. We need to downsize dramatically. He spread papers across the kitchen table, showing me the steps he'd already taken. Canceling club memberships, closing unnecessary credit accounts, researching condos in more affordable areas. I should have done this 5 years ago, he admitted. Instead, I let my pride and your mother's fear of social judgment trap us all in an unsustainable situation. As we reviewed his financial plan, our conversation unexpectedly shifted to deeper waters. Your mother wasn't always like this, he said, staring into his coffee mug. When we first married, she was funny, adventurous. We lived in a tiny apartment and thought it was paradise. What changed? I asked, trying to reconcile this description with the status-obsessed woman I knew. Success changed us. The more we acquired, the more we feared losing it. The social circle we entered had unspoken rules about consumption, about appearances. We adapted, then internalized those values until they became our own. He told me stories I'd never heard, about my maternal grandparents' financial struggles, about my mother's childhood humiliations wearing secondhand clothes and being excluded from social events, about her determination to never experience that insecurity again, a determination that calcified into rigid status consciousness. I'm not excusing her behavior, he clarified, especially toward you, but there's context I should have helped you understand years ago. That evening, Jason joined us at the lake house. The 3 of us sat on the dock as the sun set, drinking beer and talking more openly than we ever had before. Jason shared his struggles with alcohol, his fear of failing to live up to our father's expectations, his growing realization that he'd been chasing the wrong definition of success. I want to sell the Mercedes, my father announced suddenly. Use the money to pay back some of what Rebecca's given us. It won't come close to covering 5 years of mortgage payments, Jason pointed out. It's a start, our father insisted, and selling the house should free up enough equity to repay the rest, even in this market. I didn't do it for repayment, I said. I know, but this isn't about what you expected. It's about what I need to do. A week after the dinner confrontation, we gathered again, this time at my parents' house. The formal living room felt different somehow, as if the revelation had physically altered the space. My mother joined us, pale and subdued in a simple outfit I didn't recognize, not her usual carefully coordinated ensemble. "I've put the house on the market," my father announced without preamble. "We found a two-bedroom condo in Newton that will suit us fine." My mother flinched slightly but didn't object. "Jason has agreed to handle the sale and the move," he continued, "and Rebecca has graciously offered financial planning assistance as we transition." I hadn't actually made that offer yet, but I nodded agreement. My mother stared at her, hands folded in her lap. "Margaret," my father prompted gently, "do you have anything to add?" She looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time that day. "I don't know what to say to you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I thought I knew has turned out to be false." "Not everything, Mom. My own daughter was secretly supporting us while I criticized her life choices." She shook her head slowly. "What kind of mother does that make me?" "A human one," I said, surprising myself with the response. "One who made mistakes, like we all do." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an acknowledgement that behind the critical, status-obsessed facade was a flawed human being capable of reflection and perhaps change. "I'd like to be part of the solution now," she said carefully. "Not just the problem." It was a small step, but significant coming from a woman who had spent decades avoiding unpleasant realities. As we discussed practical next steps, I set clear boundaries. I would help with financial planning, but not direct support. I would be available for advice, but not bailouts. I would remain part of their lives, but on terms that respected my own choices and values. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my parents were actually seeing me, not just their projection of who they thought I should be. Returning to work after the confrontation felt like stepping into a different life, though nothing had externally changed. My office was the same, my responsibilities identical, my team unchanged. But internally, I'd shed a weight I'd carried for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "You seem different," observed Carla, my assistant director, after a particularly productive staff meeting. "More present somehow." I smiled. "I've made some personal changes that have been clarifying." The most immediate change was financial. Without my parents' mortgage to cover, my budget expanded dramatically. For the first time in my adult life, I had true disposable income. I approached this newfound financial freedom cautiously, wary of overcorrecting into unnecessary consumption after years of extreme frugality. Dr. Levine helped me process the aftermath of the confrontation and its ongoing reverberations through my family. "You're experiencing a form of identity shift," she explained during one session. "For years, you've defined yourself partly through this secret support role and the resentment it created. Now you're free to discover who Rebecca is without that burden." The exploration was both exhilarating and terrifying. I started small, allowing myself little luxuries I'd previously denied. A weekend trip to the mountains, a few new pieces of clothing that weren't strictly necessary but simply brought me joy. A bicycle for recreational riding rather than just practical transportation. "You've never mentioned wanting to bike before," my friend Mia observed as we rode along the Charles River one Saturday. "There are a lot of things I never allowed myself to want," I replied. Dating entered my life again, this time without the complications of financial secrecy. I reconnected with Eric, the city government employee I'd pushed away during my years of secret support. Our first coffee was awkward, layered with the weight of our unresolved ending. "You look happy," he said, studying me across the table. "More relaxed than I remember." "I am," I acknowledged. "A lot has changed." Slowly, I shared the story with him, explaining the family secret that had made genuine connection impossible before. His response was thoughtful, without judgment. "That explains so much," he said. "I always sensed you were hiding something, but I assumed it was much worse. A gambling problem, massive debt, even a criminal past." I laughed. "Just a family with financial amnesia and a daughter with an overdeveloped sense of responsibility." Our relationship rebuilt gradually, on a foundation of honesty this time. No more canceled plans due to secret second jobs. No more vague explanations about my financial choices. No more compartmentalized life, where my romantic relationships existed in complete separation from my family reality. Meanwhile, my parents faced their own transformation, though far less willingly. The house sold surprisingly quickly, a developer offering cash for the prime location. The downsizing process was painful, especially for my mother, who fought to keep possessions that wouldn't fit in their new space. "But these are Waterford, Crystal," she protested, as Jason helped them sort items for an estate sale. "They were a wedding gift from the Andersons." "Mom, you've used them once in the last decade," Jason pointed out. "The condo has limited storage." My father adapted more readily, seeming almost relieved to shed the trappings of their former lifestyle. He sold his luxury car, paid off outstanding debts, and opened a small consulting practice, advising medium-sized businesses on risk management lessons he'd learned the hard way. The most surprising development came from my brother. After helping our parents relocate, Jason took a hard look at his own career trajectory. "I never actually wanted to be a developer," he confessed during one of our newly regular sibling dinners. "I just thought it was expected, the family business and all." "What would you have chosen instead?" I asked. "Architecture," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "I love the design aspect, the problem solving. Not just building things to make money, but creating spaces that serve a purpose, that improve lives." By summer, he'd enrolled in an architecture certificate program, supplementing his business degree with technical skills. The struggling alcoholic was replaced by a focused student with a clear passion. My mother's transformation was the slowest and most tentative. The social humiliation she'd feared did materialize to some extent. Former friends drifted away when the dinner invitations to the impressive house stopped. Country club acquaintances suddenly became too busy to meet for lunch. The community she'd cultivated through displays of wealth largely evaporated when that wealth disappeared. "They were never really friends," she admitted during a rare vulnerable moment when I visited their new condo. "Just people who liked what we represented, what we could provide." I felt a flicker of compassion, seeing her genuine hurt. "Real friendships can be built on more substantial foundations," I suggested gently. "At my age? Starting over? Why not? You're barely 60, Mom. That's hardly ancient history." To my surprise, she took halting steps in a new direction. She began volunteering at a community center near their condo, initially just to fill empty hours, but gradually developing genuine connections with the staff and other volunteers. "They don't care what car I drive or where I vacation," she observed with apparent wonder. "It's the strangest thing." By fall, I felt ready for a change that had been in the back of my mind for years. I began house hunting, no longer constrained to the cheapest possible living situation. After viewing dozens of properties, I found a small but charming two-bedroom house in Jamaica Plain, with a tiny yard and proximity to both my work and public transportation. The day I closed on the house, I invited my family for a simple dinner. Jason brought wine. My father arrived with a toolbox, already planning small improvements he could help with. My mother brought a houseplant, a peace lily, with a card that simply said, "New Beginnings." We ate takeout pizza at my new kitchen counter, sitting on the folding chairs I'd brought from my apartment. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, perhaps ever. No pretense, no performance, just four flawed people finding a new way to be family. "A toast," Jason proposed, raising his glass. "To Rebecca, homeowner and family truth-teller. And to honesty," my father added. "However difficult." My mother hesitated, then added softly, "And to second chances." We clinked glasses, the sound echoing in my still empty house. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. There were still moments of tension, old patterns reasserting themselves, wounds not fully healed. But it was real in a way our family interactions had never been before. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on my front steps, listening to the neighborhood sounds and feeling the weight of homeownership, of putting down roots. For the first time in my adult life, I was creating a space that was truly mine, unburdened by secret obligations or others' expectations. The journey wasn't complete. for me or my family. My mother still occasionally made tone-deaf comments about my career or lifestyle, though she caught herself more often than not. My father still struggled with financial transparency, decades of habitual secrecy hard to break. Jason and I were still learning how to be genuine siblings rather than competitors in our parents' unspoken hierarchy, but we were trying. All of us, in our imperfect ways, were trying to build something authentic from the ruins of our carefully constructed facades. And that, I realized as I unlocked the door to my new home, was worth more than any appearance of perfection could ever be. 1 year after the confrontation dinner that changed everything, we gathered at my house to celebrate my 33rd birthday. The small backyard was in full spring bloom, thanks largely to my mother's unexpected interest in gardening, a hobby she'd discovered in her post-mansion life. "The hydrangeas are coming in nicely," she observed, inspecting the bushes she'd helped me plant last fall. "They need more acid in the soil to keep that blue color." My father manned the grill, a housewarming gift from Jason, with surprising competence for a man who'd rarely cooked during my childhood. "Medium rare for you, Rebecca?" he called over. "Perfect," I answered, watching this new version of my father, more relaxed in khakis and a casual shirt than I'd ever seen him in his formal business attire. Jason arrived last, bringing his new girlfriend, Marisa, a landscape architect he'd met through his certificate program. The transformation in my brother was perhaps the most dramatic of all. Sober for 10 months now, he'd lost the bloated puffiness of his drinking days. His eyes were clear, his laugh genuine. "Sorry we're late," he said, hugging me. We were finalizing the plans for the community garden project. The project was a collaboration between Jason's design skills and my nonprofit's community development initiative, a green space that would provide fresh produce for the neighborhood and job training for residents. It represented the first real professional collaboration between us, a partnership I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. As we settled around the patio table for dinner, I took a moment to observe the scene. My mother, wearing jeans and a simple blouse rather than her former designer wardrobe, arranging a salad she'd made herself. My father, serving food rather than directing staff to do it. Jason, animated and engaged, his former competitive edge replaced by genuine interest in others. And me, hosting a family gathering without anxiety or resentment, in a home purchased with my own money that I was proud to share. "A penny for your thoughts, birthday girl," my father said, noticing my contemplative expression. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a year," I replied. "For the better, I hope," my mother said, a note of uncertainty in her voice. "Definitely for the better," I assured her. The changes hadn't come easily. After the initial shock of the confrontation, we'd all faced painful adjustments. My parents sold their house and moved to the modest condo in Newton, a transition that sent my mother into a brief depression. She'd built her identity around that house, around hosting perfect dinner parties and maintaining appearances. Without that anchor, she floundered. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted during a difficult conversation last summer. "Without the house, without the social circle, without everything." "Maybe that's the opportunity," I suggested carefully, "to figure out who Margaret Wilson is beyond those external markers." Her journey had been halting, with steps forward and back. The community center volunteering led to a friendship with Elena, a retired teacher who shared her love of literature, but none of her former materialistic values. Through Elena, she discovered the local garden club, where her meticulous attention to detail found a productive outlet. My father's transition had been different but equally profound. The financial transparency I'd insisted upon revealed that his situation had been even worse than I'd realized. Beyond the mortgage, there were tax issues, outstanding business debts, and credit card balances that had been quietly compounding for years. "I kept thinking I was one deal away from fixing everything," he confessed during the difficult process of untangling his finances. "Always just around the corner from making it all right again." With professional help, he addressed each issue systematically. The sale of the house cleared the mortgage and some of the larger debts. He made payment arrangements for the rest, living on a strict budget for the first time in his adult life. His consulting business, started with realistic expectations rather than grand ambitions, provided modest but steady income. I sleep better now, he told me recently, even with less money, less status. The constant anxiety of maintaining the facade was exhausting. Jason's transformation began with rehab, a 6-week program he entered voluntarily after the family confrontation. I was using alcohol to numb the sense of failure, he explained after completing the program. To hide from the fact that I was trying to be someone I'm not. His architecture studies gave him a new direction, one based on genuine interest rather than inherited expectation. His relationship with Marisa, built on shared passions and honest communication, was healthier than any he'd had before. As for me, the year brought professional advancement and personal growth in equal measure. Freed from the financial burden of supporting my parents, I focused my energy on expanding our organization's impact. We secured additional funding, launched the community garden project with Jason, and established a financial literacy program based partly on the lessons I'd learned through my family's struggles. The promotion came with another salary increase, allowing me to build my own financial security for the first time. I contributed to retirement accounts, created an emergency fund that was mine alone, and even took my first real vacation in years, a 2-week exploration of the Pacific Northwest with Eric, our relationship now strong enough for travel together. I have an announcement, my mother said, pulling me back to the present moment as we finished the birthday dinner. I've been offered a part-time position at the community center. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. Doing what? Coordinating their senior outreach program. She looked both proud and slightly embarrassed. Apparently, my organizational skills and attention to detail are useful qualities, even without the social status attached. They're lucky to have you, Jason said warmly. It doesn't pay much, she added quickly. Old habits of valuing compensation above all still occasionally surfacing. But it matters, my father said, reaching for her hand. The work matters. It was the kind of statement he never would have made a year ago, when worth was measured exclusively in dollars and status. The change in his values was perhaps the most surprising development of all. After dinner, Eric arrived to join us for cake, having given me the gift of family time, before adding himself to the mix. As my parents chatted comfortably with him, I stepped into the kitchen with Jason to grab dessert plates. Remember last year's birthday? He asked quietly. That awful dinner at La Maison where Mom barely acknowledged your promotion and Dad spent the whole time talking about my failing business? Hard to forget, I admitted. Though sometimes it feels like a different lifetime. It was, he said seriously. For all of us. That night at the restaurant, when you finally said the truth out loud, it was like watching dominoes fall. Painful, but necessary. When we returned to the table with cake and coffee, my mother was showing Eric photos of the community garden plans, her animation genuine as she described the project's potential impact. Rebecca's always had this vision, I overheard her say, seeing potential where others just see problems. I didn't understand it before, but now, she trailed off, noticing me nearby. Our eyes met, a moment of silent acknowledgement passing between us. She hadn't explicitly apologized for years of criticism and dismissal, but this recognition of my values represented something more meaningful than words. Later, as everyone prepared to leave, my mother lingered behind. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked, an echo of the hundreds of talks throughout my childhood that had really been lectures in disguise. "Of course," I said, steeling myself slightly out of habit. We sat on the front porch, the spring evening pleasant around us. She twisted her hands in her lap, uncharacteristically hesitant. "You were never a failure," she finally said, the words emerging with difficulty. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what, Mom?" "Of insecurity. Of returning to where I started." She looked at her hands. "My father lost everything when I was 12. We went from comfortable to poor overnight. The social humiliation was formative." "You never told me that," I said softly. "It wasn't something I wanted to remember, let alone share. I built my adult life as a fortress against that kind of vulnerability. When you chose a path that prioritized meaning over money, it threatened everything I thought kept us safe. Money doesn't guarantee security," I pointed out gently. Dad's business proved that. Yes, she agreed. A lesson I've learned very late in life. The irony is that after all my fears of social judgment, the people who've shown me the most kindness this past year are those I would have previously considered beneath my notice. Elena, with her unfashionable clothes and modest home. The seniors at the community center with their fixed incomes and practical priorities. She reached over and took my hand, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it momentarily startled me. "I'm sorry I couldn't see your worth," she said simply, "that I measured success by such limited metrics." It wasn't a comprehensive apology for everything, but it was honest, perhaps the first truly honest exchange we'd ever had. I squeezed her hand in response. "We're building something better now," I said. "All of us." As I watched my family drive away later that evening, Eric joined me on the porch. "That seemed like a success," he observed. "Different from last year's birthday dinner that ended with you calling me in tears." "Progress, not perfection," I agreed, leaning against him. "We're all works in progress." 6 weeks later, I found myself back at La Maison, the scene of the confrontation that had changed everything. This time, I'd made the reservation, inviting my family for dinner on my parents' wedding anniversary. The maitre d' led us to a different table than last time, though the restaurant itself was unchanged. The white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and formal service remained the same, but our presence in this space was entirely transformed. My mother wore a simple dress rather than designer labels. My father ordered a moderately priced wine instead of top-shelf scotch. Jason and Marisa joined us, their easy affection adding warmth to the gathering. "It's strange being back here," my mother admitted, looking around. "I used to think places like this were so important." "The food is still good," I said with a smile. "It's just not the measure of our worth anymore." We toasted my parents' 38 years together, acknowledging both the difficult past and the more authentic present. As we enjoyed our meal, conversation flowed naturally between topics that would have been forbidden a year ago. My father's therapy progress, my mother's new friends at the community center, Jason's sobriety milestones, my organization's work with families facing foreclosure. "You know," my father said thoughtfully, "for all the pain of this past year, I think we're finally becoming the family we were meant to be." "Better late than never," Jason offered. My mother, who once would have changed the subject at any hint of emotional vulnerability, nodded agreement. "I wish we'd gotten here sooner, but I'm grateful we got here at all." As I looked around the table at these familiar faces now showing expressions and sharing thoughts I'd never seen before, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the truth, even when it hurts. Our family would never be perfect. We still had moments of tension, of falling into old patterns, of miscommunication and hurt feelings. But we were real now, in a way we'd never been before, and that reality, however imperfect, was worth more than any carefully maintained illusion could ever be. If you've ever had to stand up to family members who didn't see your true value, I hope my story resonates with you. Sometimes the people who should support us the most are actually the ones who understand us the least. Have you ever had to reveal a difficult truth to family? Did it change your relationships for better or worse? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story spoke to you, please hit like and subscribe for more real family stories. And remember, sometimes the biggest act of love is being honest, even when it's hard. Thank you for listening to my journey from family scapegoat to truth teller. Until next time, this is Rebecca, wishing you the courage to live your authentic life.